I've had a couple of busy weeks doing other work, and so we haven't done a lot to the car. Woody's been just squirreling away at a few bits and pieces and documenting that as well. But now we've almost got the engine bay all complete. We've done the cooling pipes for the radiator out of stainless, because that's the easiest way to get the complex shape that we need. We've done the dump pipe, and we've plumbed up the boost control, the wastegate and the boost control solenoid. Got all our intercooler pipes done, got our idle control all adapted to fit. All the wiring's done for the engine itself. We've still got to run the original wiring from the car back through the firewall and just tidy it all up. It's all original. We just got to adapt the alternator wiring, because it used to have an external alternator regulator, and I've just going to do a general tidy up on it, because it's pretty scabby looking. We've painted everything that we can. The engine bay is looking really good. It's looking 1,000% better than it did before. It all gets pretty messy once you start putting all the pipes and hoses and fittings and stuff in there. That's just how it is. If you want to have a functional engine bay, it's got to be like that. We've just got to do a throttle cable, and I'm just waiting on a turbo beanie to put over the top of the exhaust housing to keep the heat in there and away from the engine bay parts. But otherwise it's looking pretty good to go. So we're going to move on to doing the fuel system now. We're just going to do a returnless system with a single -6 Teflon line coming from the boot mounted surge tank to the front. We'll go over that in a second. Otherwise we're nearly good to go. Just got to do a diff, tail shaft, and get it running. For the fuel system for the car, we're going to use a boot mounted surge tank. Normally I don't like to do that because it causes all sorts of problems with smell and noise, but we don't really have a choice in this case, because we can't put a pump inside the tank because it's an odd shape. It's dished out for the spare wheel to sit inside, and there's nowhere to drop a tank mounted pump in. So we're going to use this surge tank. This is one that fits an 044 inside the tank, which being covered in fuel tends to shut them up a bit better, because they're a fairly noisy pump. Then we got a reg on top, which basically just dumps straight back into the tank. So it's a deadhead system, so there'll only be one line going to the front of the car to the rail, which comes from here after it's got the regulated pressure. So to draw out of the tank, we've got a Pierberg low volume pump. It's a roller cell, so it's pretty quiet, which will then pump into the tank through this fitting. Then the overflow from the tank then goes into the filler neck of the fuel tank, because there isn't any other fittings available in the tank at all, because it never needed anything else when it only had a carburetor. So we're using a mixture of speed flow and just brass fittings. The brass doesn't look the best, but the cost difference is enough to warrant it. We're going to have a gauge in here, which is just there so we can set the pressure initially. We'll probably run about 60 psi constant, and then because it doesn't have a vacuum source going to it to account for manifold pressure, the Elite will then be programmed to account for the fact that the manifold pressure has risen, which then takes away fuel pressure. So we've got enough fuel flow to account for that, so it's not going to be a problem. So that's all we need to do. We just got to get it in there now. This is our fuel pickup. It's just a float for the fuel level and a single pipe. Just goes inside here. Probably bangs right into this big dent that someone's put there trying to put a jack under it. The car's had problems with stopping from fuel delivery, so we're going to replace it with a new pickup that's a little bit bigger. but we'll probably have to do something about this dint if it's in the vicinity of where the pickup ends up, which is around here somewhere. So we'll knock it out. Hopefully I won't get covered in fuel, but you know, we'll see. As you can see, it's in fantastic condition, as you'd expect from a 48-year-old car or whatever it is, 47.
Is that all rust?
It is. It's lived on a diet of low-octane fuel and water for its whole life, no doubt. Drain the tank out. I didn't get too much fuel up my armpits, but just feeling inside it here, feels like a sand and gravel factory. So we're going to have to pull the tank out and get it cleaned. I use like hydrofluoric acid or something like that, something that tries to kill you but cleans tanks really well. So we'll pull that out, drain it out completely and send it over to Old Cox and he'll clean it out for us. So earlier I mentioned that there was two different types of tanks for these cars. This is just the normal low capacity tank, the high performance like XY, XW GTs with the big engines in them. They had no spare wheel, or the spare wheel was mounted elsewhere, and this was completely one tank, so massive capacity, 120 litres or something ridiculous like that, because they probably use that driving down the shop. In those particular models, I've mounted an in-tank pump straight into them, but as I said, we can't do that with this one because there's nowhere to actually, there's not enough deep space to fit it. It's like a little bit of deep area and then a big shallow. So that's our surge tank setup, assembled. It's going to mount around about there, and our return line will come straight out of here into that pipe. One of the problems that we're trying to avoid is smell of fuel in the boot cavity, because it will permeate right into the inside of the car, and it's not much worse than getting into a hot car when it stinks of fuel. This fuel line that I've got is actually, it's Gates Barricade. It's guaranteed against permeation, so I've never used it before. It's a fairly new product, so hopefully that's going to do the job for us. Failing that, we'll have to use either solid lines or Teflon braid, which one takes ages to make and the other one costs a lot. So hopefully this Gates stuff is going to do the job. I'm using Teflon braid for the main dash 6 fuel line up to the front of the car because it's under pressure. So hopefully we'll nail it down with that and it won't have to spend too much money. This is the original pickup. I don't know what's happened with it. It's obviously, this gives you a bit of an idea of how much crap there is inside the fuel tank. I don't know whether they've pulled it, that's fallen off or broken off. They pulled out the pickup and just stuck it back in with nothing on there. But as I said, this car had a lot of problems with just stopping and not running again, which we kind of figured was probably something to do with fuel pickup. So definitely needs a clean out.
Holy.
There's plenty more where that came from inside the tank still. Very nice. So while I got the fuel tank out, I'm going to fit the battery cable and the wiring for the fuel pumps. So I pulled a bit of the interior out, the back seats and that sort of thing, and I followed the original wiring through the cavities in the back here, which goes into the boot, and Ford has thoughtfully put in a wiring channel for me so I can run the battery cable safely through the car up to our bulkhead connector. So that's pretty handy. So you've got to sort of have a dig in and have a look to find these things. Usually they will protect the wiring somehow with a false floor or something on most cars. Some older stuff would have like a ribbon tape type wiring going to the back of the car, but luckily for us, they've provided. So it's got these covers, which I'm just struggling to get off. Sort of like a false floor type setup. You pull out, and there's your wiring there. Mostly original, that might be a speaker wire or something. But our battery cable can run through there, right through up and into the safety of the firewall, and connect up to the main bulkhead terminal, which then powers up the engine and the rest of the car. And I'll also run both fuel pump wires out from there as well. This is our fuel line that I've run from the rear of the car from where the surge tank's going to be mounted. It's a Teflon 200 series speed flow. I've basically just followed the path of the original fuel line. It was pinned to these actual holes. It did go this way because it used to just go straight to the tank, so I've routed it around here. That's a speed flow filter. It's got a replaceable element in it. And it just ducks over the top here and through a grommet in this rear bulkhead, and then up into the surge tank, which is up there. So this will just screw on there. You can see there's a gaping hole here. We haven't cut the floor out. That's just where the fuel tank goes. The fuel tank is the floor in the rear. So we've had the fuel tank out to have it cleaned, which we've got back now. So we're ready to start putting it back together with a new pickup. There's no more dirt in the tank. It's a little bit worse for wear, but it's going to be okay, according to the old cock that cleaned it out for us. So we'll throw it back in.
Is that a genuine Ford special tool, Alan?
It is now.
Imperial for the lose.
Indeed. So here's our fuel rig, surge tank, pumps inside it, sealed with an O-ring. Got the regulator on top, just regulates back into the tank, and that goes out to the hose to the engine. No return line. That's going to return into the fitting we just talked about, and that's going to be the feed in from the pump under the car that comes out of the fuel tank itself, a low pressure one. So we'll bolt her in. We will put the boot liner back in later after we've finished off the fuel system. I've got to drill some more holes in the firewall in the bulkhead to bring the fuel line up into it yet. So we'll just lift it back up, put the lining back in. We'll also put the battery box over the lining as well. But that'll be later.
Deep in thought, eh?
Think first, cut later. I think we might mount there, straight into it out of the new pickup, and then up through here. That should come up around about the spot. This is just like a generic electrical grommet from a part shop. I've used one for the 200 series hose, which is a bit smaller in the outside diameter. This one's to suit the rubber hose. So you just got to measure it, it's 24 mil. I'll just use a step drill and punch that out to 24 mil. Give it some anti-rust proofing, some Tectile or whatever it's called in your area, and run the hose through it.
Spot, eh?
Yeah, I think I just nutsert into that rail there. I ran this dual core cable along with the battery cable when we ran the battery cabling to the front of the car. So it's routed along the same path. It's not power and ground, they're both powers from the relay box controlled by the Haltech. One of them's for the low pressure pump and the other one's for the 044 high pressure pump. So obviously I have to route one way and one the other, and then put grounds on them. pretty much done with the fuel system now. I've just done the wiring for the 2 pumps. Everything's set up. We just got to bolt the battery box down and then put the trim and everything back in the boot. One thing to mention when you're doing this surge tank setup is you have to leave this high pressure pump off until your surge tank is full. So when you do your initial startup of the pumps, you've got to leave this one off. Run the second pump until the whole thing's saturated. Otherwise you'll never get it full because this will just run dry and carry on. So just a little tip. So we'll put fuel in it, power them up, fill the tank, check for leaks, then put this on and then power it up again and then adjust our fuel pressure on the gauge and check for leaks upstream, up under the engine, and then bleed out the engine. We've got a couple of caps there because it's not return. You need to just bleed the air out, let some fuel through, and then it'll be good to go.
The next episode of the Skid Factory, we upgrade the diff and the Fairlane finally has a handbrake that works.